In the frozen fields near Bastogne, Belgium, December 25, 1944, Christmas Day had become a battlefield. Through the morning fog, 15 German Panzer Mark IV tanks rumbled forward, their steel hulls bristling with enemy soldiers clinging to their sides. They were pushing hard toward the surrounded American paratroopers, intent on crushing the defenders and capturing the vital crossroads town. Standing between them and victory was a small force of American tank destroyers, sleek fast machines called the M18 Hellcat. What happened next would test whether speed could truly defeat armor, whether American ingenuity could overcome German engineering, and whether a vehicle designed on flawed doctrine could survive its baptism of fire. The story of the M18 Hellcat begins not on a battlefield, but in the aftermath of a shocking defeat that America merely witnessed from across the ocean. In May 1940, as Nazi Germany's armored divisions tore through France in a matter of weeks, American military planners watched in horror. The French had possessed more tanks than the Germans, better fortifications and a larger army. Yet they had been crushed in just 6 weeks. The secret to Germany's success was clear: concentrated armor attacks supported by aircraft, smashing through defensive lines before the defenders could react. The world called it Blitzkrieg, Lightning War. American Army Chief of Staff George C. Marshall understood the implications immediately. The existing U.S. tactical plans relied on stationary anti-tank guns positioned along defensive lines, but France had proven that static defenses couldn't stop massed armor moving at speed. Marshall faced a terrifying reality. When German tanks eventually attacked American forces, foot soldiers armed only with rifles would panic at the sight of steel monsters bearing down on them. Something had to change, and it had to change quickly. In April 1941, 8 months before America would even enter the war, Marshall issued a directive that would reshape American armored doctrine. He tasked his staff with creating specialized mobile units specifically designed to counter enemy tank attacks. These wouldn't be defensive positions waiting to be overrun. They would be hunters. Fast, aggressive formations that could rush to threatened sectors and destroy enemy armor before it could break through. Marshall envisioned a new kind of warfare where American speed and firepower would neutralize German tactical advantages. Lieutenant Colonel Andrew D. Bruce received the assignment to turn Marshall's vision into reality. Bruce worked in the War Department's planning division, and he approached the problem with an engineer's mindset and a tactician's urgency. That same month, the Army Ordnance Department issued its first requirement. America needed a mobile platform mounting a 37mm gun that could keep pace with armored warfare. Within weeks, 2 designs emerged. The M6 mounted a 37mm gun on a 3/4-ton truck, firing over the rear. The M3 placed a World War I vintage French 75mm gun on an M3 half-track, firing over the front. By October 1941, the M3 was already being tested in war games. At this point, the Army officially changed its terminology from anti-tank units to tank destroyer battalions, reflecting a shift from defensive thinking to offensive hunting. But Bruce wasn't satisfied. Trucks and half-tracks were compromises, stopgap measures. He dreamed of something revolutionary: a tracked vehicle faster than any tank, mounting a gun more powerful than anything the enemy possessed. His concept was radical: deliberately sacrifice armor protection to achieve unprecedented speed. A lightly armored vehicle could dodge enemy fire rather than absorb it, could outmaneuver slower tanks, and could choose when and where to engage. It was a gamble, trading survivability for mobility. In December 1941, when America entered the war, Bruce's concept became an urgent priority. In early 1942, the Army issued requirements for what would become the M18 tank destroyer. General Motors' Buick division won the contract to produce Bruce's vision. Buick's publicity department, understanding the power of a good name, christened it the Hellcat, evoking images of a fierce, predatory beast. The name stuck, though whether the vehicle would live up to such a fearsome reputation remained to be seen. Initial orders in November 1943 called for 1,000 units. When Buick delivered the last of these in January 1944, the Army immediately ordered 1,800 more. By war's end, Buick had manufactured 2,507 M18 Hellcats. The Army's Tank Destroyer Center subjected early production models to rigorous testing, and problems emerged immediately. The shock absorbers failed repeatedly under the stress of high-speed maneuvers and rough terrain. Engineers redesigned them, making them heavier and more robust. The 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion received 2 trial models for field evaluation. 3 more went to the 894th Battalion fighting at the Anzio beachhead in Italy. After examining the new vehicles, the 894th's commanders made a sobering decision: they wouldn't deploy them in combat. The armor was simply too thin. In head-to-head engagements with German panzers, the Hellcats would be death traps. Instead, they relegated them to reconnaissance duties, where their speed could be an asset and direct combat could be avoided. Reports from the field throughout fall 1944 led to a flood of requested modifications. Crews wanted better turret covers to protect against artillery fragments raining from above. They needed improved coaxial machine guns for close-in defense. Muzzle brakes were essential to reduce the violent recoil of the 76mm gun. Even the improved shock absorbers needed further strengthening. Soldiers also requested increased ammunition storage. Running out of shells in combat was unacceptable. The vehicle's ground pressure needed reduction to improve performance in mud and snow. The travel lock that secured the gun during movement required redesign. Many of these improvements weren't incorporated until late 1944, during the final production runs. The ultimate version featured wider 21-inch tracks for better mobility. Despite all the modifications, the Army couldn't escape one fundamental concern. The M18's armor was simply inadequate. This had been intentional in Bruce's original concept, but reality on the battlefield told a different story. In August 1944, engineers concluded that adding 1 ton of supplemental armor wouldn't significantly impact the vehicle's prized speed and mobility. They designed retrofit kits to add protective plating over the turret. However, bureaucratic delays and production priorities meant these kits never reached the vehicles already fighting in Europe. When Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944, only 30 tank destroyer battalions waited in England for deployment. The M18 units finally entered combat in late July, when General George Patton's Third Army joined Operation Cobra, the massive breakout from the Normandy hedgerows. Patton's mission was to exploit the gap torn in German lines by General Courtney Hodge's First Army, racing through the breach before the enemy could react. The Hellcats' first month of combat proved anticlimactic and frustrating. They saw very little action against enemy armor. Instead, commanders used them in roles never intended by their designers. They escorted supply convoys, protecting vulnerable trucks from potential German attacks. They provided direct fire support to infantry units, essentially functioning as mobile artillery. The crews had trained to hunt tanks but instead found themselves performing tasks that any armored vehicle could do. The first genuine test of the M18's intended purpose came in mid-September 1944. Patton's 4th Armored Division, spearheading the drive through the Lorraine region toward the Saar River, suddenly encountered formations of German Panzer Mark V tanks, the famous Panthers. American crews quickly learned a harsh lesson about their vehicle's limitations. The 76mm gun on the M18 couldn't penetrate a Panther's frontal armor at normal combat ranges. The Panther's thick steel plates laughed off American shells fired from distances beyond 300 yards. To achieve a kill, M18 crews had to close to suicidally short ranges, maneuvering to fire at the Panther's mantlet, the armor plates surrounding the gun, where the protection was weakest. This required exceptional courage and skill, exposing the thinly armored Hellcat to devastating return fire. Throughout September, Tank destroyer battalions clashed repeatedly with German armored battle groups. When the smoke cleared and tallies were made, the results seemed encouraging on paper. 39 Panthers destroyed at the cost of only 4 M18s. But these numbers told only part of the story. They didn't capture the terror of closing to point-blank range with an enemy tank that could kill you from half a mile away. They didn't reflect the crews lost when a single penetrating shot turned their vehicle into an inferno. Early field reports did praise certain aspects of the M18's design. Crews reported that their vehicles could travel hundreds of miles under brutal conditions without requiring major repairs to either the armament or engine. Maintenance on moving parts was minimal compared to other armored vehicles. The Hellcat's mechanical reliability was genuinely impressive, a testament to Buick's engineering. But reliability meant little if you couldn't survive combat. One of the most frequent and bitter complaints concerned the mounting of the .50 caliber machine gun. The weapon sat atop the turret in such a position that the vehicle commander had to expose his entire upper body to enemy fire to operate it. Small arms fire, shell fragments, and sniper rounds killed or wounded countless commanders who had no choice but to stand in the open while defending their vehicle. This design flaw seemed almost criminally negligent, sacrificing crew safety for a feature that should have protected them. Through the fall of 1944, M18 deployment in Europe remained limited. By October, only 5 battalions operated the Hellcat. By December, that number had grown to just 9. The slow adoption rate reflected a harsh reality. The 76mm gun simply wasn't adequate for tank versus tank combat. It performed no better than the 3-inch gun mounted on the older M10 tank destroyer. In fact, many crews preferred the M10 despite its slower speed. The M10's fighting compartment had better layout and functionality. Its thicker armor, while still insufficient against heavy German tanks, at least provided psychological comfort and some protection against lighter weapons. Yet M18 crews did appreciate certain design features of their vehicles. They praised the turret rotation system, which allowed faster target acquisition than the M10. The larger access door made entering and exiting the vehicle easier, particularly important when abandoning a damaged machine under fire. Features that simplified engine repair earned appreciation from mechanics working under combat conditions. Most significantly, crews loved the M18's lightweight and resulting superior mobility in mud and snow compared to the heavier M10. In the brutal winter conditions of late 1944, this advantage could mean the difference between reaching a threatened position in time or arriving too late. The inadequacy of the 76mm gun against Panther and Tiger tanks prompted desperate requests for better ammunition. Since 1943, ordnance engineers had been developing a revolutionary new round. The HVAP, high-velocity armor-piercing, featured an ingenious design. The outer shell peeled away on impact, while the smaller tungsten carbide core continued forward, concentrating all the kinetic energy into a smaller point for superior penetration. Tests against Panther-equivalent armor showed the HVAP dramatically outperformed standard ammunition. The problem was tungsten, a critical war material desperately needed for many applications and in chronically short supply. The first HVAP rounds reached frontline units on September 11, 1944. Tank and tank destroyer crews treasured this ammunition, but it remained scarce throughout the war. Crews had to carefully ration HVAP rounds, saving them for encounters with heavy armor while using standard ammunition against lighter targets. The true test of the M18 came during the German Ardennes offensive beginning, December 16, 1944. The attack history would remember as the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler's last gamble in the West sent hundreds of thousands of German troops and hundreds of tanks smashing through thinly held American lines. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, attached to the legendary 101st Airborne Division, found itself surrounded at Bastogne, a vital crossroads town that controlled movement throughout the region. On Christmas Day 1944, German forces made a desperate push to capture Bastogne, before American relief forces could arrive. 15 Panzer Mark IV tanks, their steel hulls covered with German grenadiers, broke through the perimeter, held by the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment. The situation looked catastrophic. Infantry couldn't stop armor without support, but the M18s of the 705th rushed to the breach. What followed was a savage close-quarters battle. The Hellcats maneuvered frantically, their speed finally proving its worth in the chaos of breakthrough combat. Working in coordination with paratroopers firing bazookas, they systematically destroyed the German armor. By day's end, all 15 Panthers lay burning or disabled. The defenders had held. Throughout the Christmas fighting around Bastogne, M18 crews engaged German armor repeatedly. The final tally showed 27 German tanks destroyed by the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion at the cost of 6 M18s. These numbers represented victory, but they also revealed the continuing imbalance. Even in ideal circumstances with veteran crews and desperate determination, the M18s still suffered losses that would have been unacceptable in a vehicle with adequate armor protection. By early April 1945, 12 tank destroyer battalions in the 12th Army Group operated M18s, continuing to serve until Germany's surrender. But the Hellcat story extended beyond Europe. In the Pacific theater, demand for tank destroyers proved far lower. The primary reason was simple. Japanese tanks posed nothing like the threat German panzers presented. Japanese armor was lighter, less numerous, and tactically employed in ways that didn't require specialized countermeasures. Additionally, the M18's thin armor and open turret design made it particularly vulnerable in the Pacific's unique combat environment. Pacific fighting emphasized close infantry combat in dense jungle and brutal urban warfare. The open turret that exposed M18 crews to artillery fragments in Europe became a death trap in the Pacific, where Japanese infantry specialized in close-range attacks. Enemy soldiers could easily lob grenades into the open fighting compartment or pick off crew members with small arms fire. Tank destroyer tactics in the Pacific necessarily emphasized standoff combat, using the vehicle's gun range while infantry protection compensated for its vulnerability to close assault. The 637th Tank Destroyer Battalion became the first Pacific unit to deploy M18s, entering combat in January 1945 during the liberation of the Philippines. They participated in operations on Luzon, including the savage street fighting for Manila. In the capital's ruins, tank destroyers provided fire support from protected positions, while infantry cleared buildings. The battalion's performance during Manila's liberation earned them the Presidential Unit Citation. The M18 saw limited action during the invasion of Leyte in October 1944, but proved more useful during the Aishima phase of the Okinawa campaign in 1945, where its mobility on the island's rough terrain earned appreciation. When the war ended and military analysts conducted final assessments, their verdict on the M18 was damning though nuanced. Any armored fighting vehicle requires balancing three fundamental characteristics: firepower, speed, and armor protection. Engineering reality demands compromises. You cannot maximize all three. This was particularly true for American tank destroyers, given the weight restrictions placed on their designs. But the M18 had pursued the wrong compromise. Lieutenant Colonel Bruce's obsession with speed had fatally unbalanced the design. The resulting vehicle failed at its primary mission, destroying enemy tanks. From the moment it entered service in 1944, the M18 proved incapable of defeating the later generation of German armor under normal combat conditions. Crews had to perform exceptional maneuvers, take extraordinary risks, and demonstrate remarkable skill to succeed. While many crews appreciated the Hellcat's impressive road speed, battlefield evidence showed this speed rarely provided significant tactical advantage. High speed on roads meant little during off-road combat where terrain, visibility, and tactical situation dictated movement far more than maximum velocity. More significantly, the thin armor and open turret roof didn't encourage crews to exploit speed through aggressive charges as Doctrine anticipated. Instead, experienced crews learned to move cautiously, avoiding exposure to enemy snipers and artillery. The design's flaws combined with unrealistic tactical doctrine meant M18 battalions rarely performed their intended mission of seeking out and destroying enemy armor. Instead, they found themselves assigned to alternative roles for which they were poorly suited. The M18 crews did achieve successes, sometimes remarkable ones like the defense of Bastogne. But these victories resulted primarily from crew ingenuity, courage, and ability to improvise rather than the weapon they'd been given. The quest to build a superb tank destroyer ultimately eluded the U.S. Army during World War II. The name Hellcat evoked a ferocious predator, but against Germany's formidable armor, the M18 could never live up to such a fearsome reputation. It remained a flawed compromise, a testament to the dangers of doctrine-driven design that ignored evolving battlefield realities. The crews who fought in Hellcats deserved better. They got speed when they needed armor, mobility when they needed firepower, and doctrine that pretended German engineering hadn't already made their vehicle obsolete before it even reached the battlefield. In the end, the M18 Hellcat story serves as a cautionary tale about the perils of rigid thinking in warfare. The Blitzkrieg that inspired its creation had already evolved by the time the Hellcat entered combat. German tanks had grown heavier, better armored, and more lethal. American designers, locked into doctrine developed years earlier, built a weapon for yesterday's war. The soldiers who crewed these vehicles paid the price for their commander's miscalculation, fighting with courage and skill to overcome the limitations of a machine that promised speed, but delivered vulnerability. Their story reminds us that in war, doctrine must adapt to reality and not the other way around.